Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. It is Monday, August 3rd, and we're here for our weekly 2 o'clock update on the coronavirus outbreak and some related issues as well. We are covered in person by members of the press. We have with us both News 12 and Insider Press present with us, and then remotely we have a number of other press organizations that are following us, and at the end of this we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, both here and remotely through Catherine Chaffee. In a few minutes I'm going to have our Commissioner of Health, Dr. Shalita Amler, who has been an absolute star for us over the course of these 6+ months of this pandemic. We've relied on her professional advice on an ongoing basis, tried to shape policy around that advice, and we're very pleased to have her with us here to talk about one of the issues that we want to cover. We're going to start, first of all, with the statistics, as we try to do each time, to give us an idea of the extent of the pandemic as it is today. With the information that we see from the state, we have 36,014 positive tests year to date for COVID. 35,551 of those cases are 2 weeks or older in duration. So we calculate that to mean there are 463 active cases, people who have not yet cleared the 2-week period of time. And that 463 number, I'm going to give you a comparison in a little bit as to how it compares to other times. That is the lowest number of active cases we have had on the downslope of this bell curve. When the infection began, we had our first recorded case on the 3rd day of March. As we swooped up very high, we've been coming down since the peak period of time. This now on the downside at 463 active cases is the lowest number. We've hit a milestone in testing, 400,499 tests. Here in Westchester County. Now, there are some duplicate tests, some individuals that have been tested more than once, but as a relative percentage of all the testing, it's a relatively small percentage. So we can certainly use as a general number, 40% of Westchester's population has been tested. There's roughly 1 million people in the county, and testing 400,000 is roughly 40%. If it's slightly below that, 39 and change, it's a small number. But that is a significant percentage, and the testing day by day has been very robust. And that, to some degree, adds to the total number of positives. But we're seeing now that of everybody tested, of all tests that have occurred, over 90% of them are negative, 10% of them, less than 10%, are positive. However, a negative test does not mean you are negative forever. It means at the moment in time that that picture was taken, you were negative. And you could, in theory, be exposed to the disease within hours of having taken the test. So we don't want to anchor too much on the negative results. I think the fact that the positive number is under 10% is a good factor because, again, when I talk some historical numbers over the course of this pandemic, you'll see that that number was as high as a third of all the tests that were taken. So to be down to 10% is good news. We have aggregate 1,446 fatalities due to COVID since this began. We had no fatalities overnight, and over the course of the last week, we've had a total number of fatalities of 3. 3 individuals have died over the last week in Westchester County. The prior week had 3 individuals dying, and the week prior to that had 5 individuals dying. So those are still tragedies. Every death is a tragedy. But when you aggregate those numbers, you get to a very small number compared to where we were on any given night over the course of the period during the period when this pandemic was on the rise from March 1st on. I want to particularly point out this is, a notable date on the 3rd of the month because it was the 3rd of the month of March, which is 5 months ago when we first saw the indication of the extent of the COVID reality by having our first positive case. But that did not begin our response to COVID. Dr. Amler was in contact in the month of January with senior management of the county, highlighting that there were certain preparations that would need to be taken. And in the last week of January, she had a press statement relative to that. We did a press conference in February highlighting concerns about coronavirus before we had a positive case in the county. We had actually an individual who came from China, traveled from China to Westchester, home to Westchester in February, and she was isolated through county resources to monitor to make sure that she did not have COVID virus. She did not contract the virus. She was released, and that was our first. It's almost quaint now in retrospect since we've had 35,000 positive individuals tested with the virus. But nonetheless, at that point in time, we were dealing with this pandemic in February 6 months ago. and 5 months ago with the first positive test. So I think it's important to note that we have hit a numerical milestone. And I just want to give you some comparable numbers so you can get an idea of how far we've come. We have some statistics that go back to the early part of May. Now, by May, we had passed the peak, which was really in late March and in early April. And the numbers that we have in May were pretty significant compared to where we are today. Just to give you an idea, this is a 3-month snapshot between today, August 3rd, and May 3rd, 3 months ago. As of this point in time, today we have 463 active cases. We had on May 3rd, 6,081 active cases, meaning we had over 6,000 people who had not passed the 2-week incubation period from a positive test. Very significant. We have hospitalized today, our most recent number is 44 individuals hospitalized. That's a couple of days old. We're usually a few days lag. 44 individuals hospitalized at present for COVID. On May 3rd, we had 682 individuals that were hospitalized for COVID. Significant drop from where we were 3 months ago. And again, by the time we got to May 3rd, we were on the downslope from the peak, which really came at the end of March, early April. In terms of fatalities, of course, those are an accumulative number. But overnight, on the night of May 2nd into May 3rd, we lost 19 people that night. The night following that, we lost 15 people. The night after that, we lost 15 people. So over the course of those 3 nights together, we lost 49 Westchester residents in May over a 3-night period. I've just described that we have lost over the course of the last 3 to 4 weeks about the same number of people. So we still have fatalities, and it still very much affects those of a certain age and older, but the comparable numbers are dramatically better. Now, we reached the peak here in this area, Westchester not alone, but other counties as well in the New York metropolitan area, at the end of March, the beginning of April, and those numbers were even higher than the ones I gave you in May. But we have tried very hard to be very practical-minded in the way we've responded to this. We've treated this as what it is. This is a pandemic. This is a serious disease. We have fatality that proves that. We have hospitalizations, and we have anecdotal stories of people who've suffered in the hospital, very, very serious. Some who've recovered, those I've had a chance to talk to, very seriously ill from this disease. So any of the comments way back when that talked about it's going to be over in a week, it's only 15 people, all of that stuff was not accurate. What's accurate is this is a serious disease, and it does affect people who have other issues as well. Certainly advanced age, immune system problems. We've seen that hypertension and high blood pressure were factors in those people who have passed away, a comorbidity factor. So we're certainly not underestimating the fact that this disease, when coupled with existing health needs, wound up becoming fatal for a certain number of individuals. But the fatality rate is still hovering about 4% of all the number of people that tested positive, and that's a higher percentage than the flu. So when people try to make comparisons between the annual flu, for which there are vaccines to be able to take, Dr. Amler has reminded me annually about how important it is to get the flu shot. About a 4% ratio of everybody who contracts the disease here in Westchester County that have lost their life because of the disease. And 4% seems like a small percentage. 96% survive, 4% do not. But in absolute numbers, 1,400 people. That's a lot. 1,400, and actually, the exact number, 1,446 people is a lot of individuals. And if you want to get a sense of what that looks like, take a trip to Lenoir Preserve, where we establish Ribbons of Remembrance, a program down in Yonkers. It's one of our county nature parks, and behind the Whiteman Estate, we've created an area where individuals can go, write out on a ribbon and hang the ribbon on a tree or on one of these wooden structures that will help you remember the person that you lost who was important to you. And to lose that many people and to have a place to go to grieve is important, because even this day, all these months later, people who passed away in March, we've been unable to have the standard wake, the standard shiva, the standard funerals, and whatever your traditions are, to mourn the people that we loved. And I know quite a number of people who passed away, and by now, because of the extent of this disease, people in all walks of life know their neighbor, the person that they saw at work, the person who works in a store that they frequent, teacher of their child, relative, cousin, and in some cases spouse, all of which represents the tragedy of what this is. So we'll talk about other things here today, but if this disease were not fatal, if there was not a fatal element to this where people get seriously sick, but then you survive and you walk away, we'd be in a different place. But all of the things that have been done to this point is to try to minimize the number of people that lose their life. And we've had a significant loss of life in Westchester. Fortunately, that has receded. We don't know how long it will take for us to find a vaccine. We don't know how long it will take for medical science to find an antiviral treatment for the people that get this disease. I am skeptical. I didn't grow up in Missouri, the show me state, but you're going to have to show me a treatment before I start to believe that that is the answer. And I know there's a lot of people out there who will show examples of a certain thing works for a certain number of people, and that might be true. But until medical science as a profession stands behind a treatment or a vaccine, then I think we're wise to consider that we are facing this danger as great today as it was on May 3rd, on March 3rd, on February 3rd, and that is why wearing masks are necessary. I wear the mask when I'm not behind a microphone, when I'm out in public. I don't personally like it all that much. It's hot weather. I prefer not to have it on. I understand why people in social settings don't want to wear it, but this is not a matter of want. This is a matter of what is practical. What stops me from projecting disease to you if I'm in close enough quarters to you, and that's why I wear the mask, and that's why you wear it, to do the same thing for other people. But the numbers have been encouraging. And I credit all of the people out there, the common sense people of Westchester County that understand what we're facing. You've been disciplined. We've gone through a very difficult period. We'll talk a little bit about some of those other issues, ancillary issues in a second. But all of that relates to where we are this day as we now enter the month of August. It's a long way from talking about this in February, but here we are. The big decision this week that we'll hear from Governor Cuomo is whether or not schools will reopen, and if so, if they'll reopen in September after Labor Day as they normally would. This is a very stressful time. If you have children that are going to school, obviously this decision is a very pivotal decision. We've made a lot of decisions about parks and recreation, and decisions have been made in Albany about whether or not to open a certain type of business. Do you open offices? When do you open restaurants and retail and yada, yada? But opening the schools is probably the single biggest decision to be made. Obviously, we've tried to prepare for that eventuality. All of the 44 school districts in Westchester County have submitted opening plans to the governor for them to look at. And of course, all across the state, there's 700 some odd school districts in the state of New York. And the people who advise the governor are analyzing the plans to determine if these things are workable. The county has a role in working with schools if they open. It is not the predominant role. The main regulatory authority is the state. The state education department governs what happens in the school system. And when people start looking at how are they going to go to class, are they going to go alternate days, alternate weeks, how are you going to teach remotely, all those are questions that belong properly between the school district and the state of New York. But the county has a role to play if the schools are open. And one of the key roles to play is through the public health department and how the county responds when there is a positive case of COVID in a school setting. How do we go about the process of contact tracing, which is the detective work that determines who's infected and who they have interacted with over the course of the last 2 weeks. The work that we try to help provide or access to PPE, personal protective equipment, and that's not easily obtained by in the quantities that a school district will need. Remember that we shut the schools down fairly early on in the process in March. And so when we were out there getting PPE, and we were doing that for fire departments, for EMS, for certain types of institutions, we were not dealing with it for schools because schools were closed. Now that we open schools, and you're talking about significant numbers, in Yonkers, the city of Yonkers, 27,000 school children. In the city of New Rochelle, 11,000 school children. In White Plains, roughly 8,000 school children, probably a similar amount in Mount Vernon. These are a significant number of students who are working in going to school in an everyday context, plus the teachers, plus the administrators, plus the other staff members of the schools that do everything from the cafeteria to maintenance and so forth. So this is a big part of our economy and a big part of our operations as a community, even though the county doesn't have direct responsibility. We do have responsibility, as I've described, through the Department of Health, We have some responsibility through our Beeline bus system. We provide transportation for certain of the city districts for students going to high school and so forth. There are other interactions between the county and the school districts, but the school districts are doing their very best to be prepared. We have a Monday morning phone call each week. We had one this morning with school superintendents to try to go over these things and try to deal with these things. We've created a task force of individuals chaired by Joe Glazer, who is our Deputy Commissioner of Mental Health, but he's been sort of on loan, dotted line to the Health Department to try to serve as a liaison on some of these issues between different constituency groups and the Health Department. Lord knows Dr. Amler and her team of people, Peter DeLucia, Renee Recchia, the whole crew, have been worked beyond any normal expectation of human capacity over the last 6 months, and more is going to be expected of them in the days to come. So Joe's role as heading this working group is important. We have representatives from the Department of Health, Department of DPW on this as well. We'll wait to see exactly what the governor's decisions are, but in anticipation of that, we've had some WebEx seminars that have been online to show the best procedures on how to sanitize building space. We've had information about contact tracing so that school administrators understand what that process is like and how that works. We've also had a survey to all of the school districts to help them report back some information that will help us sort of help them in the way they go about doing things, and certainly with the cafeteria and the kitchen guidance that's necessary in school. So big issue this week. We believe the governor will announce it at the end of the week. He might choose to announce it a little bit sooner, but certainly that will be a major focus of our week this week. We'll talk about the other 4 major focuses this week because we've got a lot of issues all coming at the same time. But the opening of schools in the age of COVID is a major, major issue this week. And I'm going to ask Dr. Amler to join us here on the podium. And I wanted to talk about a very specific issue, then of course she'll touch on other things. We don't limit what our medical professionals have to say. So she'll say whatever she thinks is relevant. But we have heard stories of parties that have been structured for young people, teenager parties, that involve parents structure an agreement to them in which you have to show a negative COVID test. And if you do show a negative COVID test, then you're able to attend this party, which generally will have larger numbers of people than has been allocated by the governor in his restrictions for outside gatherings and inside gatherings. And I think it's important to note that our public health professionals want to be very clear about what a negative test means and what the potential jeopardy is of these kinds of things. So, Dr. Amler, if you join us here at the podium, I'll depart and share with us your thoughts about that issue and anything else you'd like to report on.
So as you heard, we've heard some stories that individuals may be hosting parties, and as a requirement of those parties, they want a negative COVID test. And in addition to that, I'm getting a lot of calls from people who've traveled to densely impacted COVID positive states that now require them to quarantine when they return. And can they get any kind of COVID test, and does that make it possible for them then to not be in quarantine, to go to work or do whatever activities they normally do? So unfortunately, the answer to both of these questions is that there really is no get out of jail card when it comes to COVID testing. So if you decided you wanted to have a party and you ask everyone to bring a negative COVID test as a way to get in the door, all that tells you is that at the moment they had that test, they were negative. I could go get a COVID test this morning, and this evening I could develop a fever and be infectious. So it's just a moment in time. And as we've talked about since all of this began, the incubation period for COVID is 14 days, from usually somewhere between 2 and 5 days for most people, but you could take up to 14 days to become symptomatic and infectious to others. So these tests really don't mean anything, and it's not a method of making yourself safe. Also, if you are a traveler, again, the same thing. No matter how far you are along in your 14 days, until those 14 days are up, getting a COVID test does not relieve you from the obligation to protect your family, your coworkers, everyone that you are around by staying in quarantine. we have done a really great job, I think, in Westchester in curbing the number of cases. And I think one of our biggest risks right now are people who've traveled to areas where we know there's large numbers of cases of COVID coming back and not doing what they're supposed to do, which is to go into quarantine for 2 weeks and protect everyone in case they do go on to become ill. So just a little bit about testing so that people, because there's still a lot of confusion around the types of tests and what these tests tell you and what they don't tell you. So the first test to talk about are the antibody tests. Antibody test is a blood test. So you go in and get your blood drawn, and the antibody test will tell us if you've had COVID in the past, and not the recent past, but I mean like 2 months ago. And so it indicates that your body has seen this virus and developed antibodies, which is our way of keeping ourselves protected against viruses. So the body makes antibodies. So the only reason somebody should really get an antibody test is if you, want to know, you think you had symptoms 2 months ago and maybe it was COVID, maybe it wasn't, but you'd like to know for certain, an antibody test would give you a good indication. The second reason would be if you know someone or you just want to give your plasma to someone who has COVID, is in the hospital, seriously ill, because plasma from recovering individuals who have antibodies is a modality of treatment for people who are seriously ill. So if you want to give plasma, if you want plasmapheresis and donate your plasma, that would be a reason to get that test. Antigen tests, which are the rapid tests, they are a swab, a nasal swab or a throat swab, and a lot of pharmacies or urgent cares may be doing these rapid antigen testing. If your rapid antigen test, which can come back like in 10, 15 minutes in some locations, they're very fast. In some places it could be an hour, but you're not talking days to get the results. Good and bad. The good is that, if your test is positive, it's positive. We assume it's positive. You'll be put into isolation. We'll be calling you to find out who you might have exposed to this and contact them so that they could be put into quarantine. And it's a good way for us to find positives rapidly and to be able to isolate and quarantine people. The problem with the rapid antigen testing is that they have a very high false negative finding. So as many as 35 to 40% of people who have a negative test could in fact have COVID, and the test just isn't showing it. So the positives say you're positive, but a rapid antigen is not an absolute indicator that you do not have COVID. And then the last one are the molecular tests that probably most people are very familiar with, the nasal swab. This is the PCR test that if you have symptoms or you've had an exposure and you think that you might have COVID, this is the test that we would want you to get to kind of rule out infectious disease. And so a positive molecular test, a positive PCR, is a very good indicator that you have COVID and you could be infectious to others. There's only one downside to that test, and that is that it detects RNA viral particles, and those RNA viral particles can be in your body for weeks. And so it is a little bit difficult for us to know exactly where you are if you just got infected or if the infection occurred several weeks ago. Either way, if you never had a negative test recently, we're going to put you in isolation if that test is positive, and we would still once again be doing contact tracing on your contacts. So I hope that will help clarify some of the confusion around testing, but I would remind people, please, don't think that you can get any one of these tests and get a negative test and then go to a large event and be safe to be at that event and not spread it to others, because there's no test that can really tell you that in that minute of time that you could get back fast enough that would be accurate enough for you to do this safely. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amler. And Dr. Amler will be available for questions when we reach the question portion of it. Those media friends of ours who are in the room, you're welcome to do an individual interview with her when we're finished here for greater detail. A few other things that relate to COVID, and then some things that don't relate to COVID that we'll give you a quick update on. In the process of looking at what parts of the society have opened up as we went from phase 1 to phase 4, we achieved phase 4 almost a month ago, and there is no phase 5 or 6 that's been identified. Those things that the governor has identified as being closed remain closed until he has an executive order to open them. That includes things like movie theaters, gyms and health clubs, a number of other activities, and the state rule at this point is organizations or group gatherings of people up to 50 people, socially distanced with masks, are permissible. Larger numbers than that are not permissible. But one of the things that was opened with the beginning of phase 4, and we're happy to report some positive economic activity out of it, is the beginning again of media production groups, filming of television, commercials, television programs, and movies here in Westchester County. Since it started up in phase 4, Westchester is now starting to get back to where we were just before the shutdown, in which we were booming. Our proximity to New York City is a great advantage. The fact that we have a suburban environment and setting gives many different venues that can be used as part of these different programs. And we just saw a small commercial production completed in the village of Mamaroneck. There's a video shoot that's scheduled for Playland later this month. That's a prominent place. The movie Big, years ago, that Tom Hanks was in when he just started out, was filmed there. Mariah Carey had a very famous music video that was filmed at Playland, so that's been a strong visual for some. But all of these different things we've seen through our tourism and film board, greater interest and greater effort in opening up these situations. We've had, just as it's been outlined, and it's flattering to know that Westchester, not because of the government of Westchester, but Westchester itself has had venues for scenes in The Irishman, the recent Netflix that was nominated for Academy Awards, Fosse Verdon, which was on FX, Mr. Robot, The Americans, Law and Order, SVU, Saturday Night Live, The Goldfinch on Amazon, and so many other different filmings. So we're very proud that Westchester is getting back on the track. We've had a few places in the economy where things have started to rebound. Parts of the economy have not rebounded, either because they're not open or because in their opening there's a reduced amount of attendance capacity, and then also because there are many of us who are not comfortable, even when something is legally opened, to come back out in the society and participate. I've talked to any number of people who say they're just not ready to go out and shop in a mall or go out to eat. And so this is part of the process that happens. And I think perhaps, again, until the vaccine and antiviral are apparent in the society and commonly used, will people really regain that sense of confidence that they had back in February when this was first beginning with us. But nonetheless, this is a positive sign that we're getting some film production that's happening. We want to mention three separate issues separate from that. We're keeping a close eye on Hurricane Isaias. We have to make sure we pronounce it properly, Isaias. It is making its way up the coast as we're talking now. In the 2 o'clock hour on Monday, it is off the shore in the southern part of the Georgia, Florida area, moving toward the Carolinas. We believe sometime over the course of the day it's going to make landfall either in Myrtle Beach area of South Carolina or just over the border in the Wilmington, Cape Fear area of North Carolina. But it is tracking, the cone of its involvement will pass by, if not over, Westchester County. We may see this sometime late tomorrow into Wednesday. We don't know what level hurricane it'll be. It was back to tropical force winds. It moved back up to a Category 1. When it's out over the open water, it gains strength and gets stronger. When it goes over land, it reduces strength. So we'll have to watch it as it progresses. And I would encourage all of us as practical-minded people. This is not the first hurricane that's come through, and it's probably not going to be the most serious hurricane of the ones that we've seen. But make intelligent, normal preparations for this to happen. If you want to make sure you have batteries at home, you have bottled water at home in case you lose power, you want to be able to connect to radio at least and get information as to what's happening out there. If you have lawn furniture or you have items on a terrace or a deck, take them inside or secure them properly so that if the winds get to a certain level, they don't fly around and become projectiles that can pose a problem. All of the practical things that people, whether you're an apartment dweller or a homeowner, know that you have to do. This is the season now. We're going to go through this more than once. Isaias is the letter I, which means there's been a few already that have formed, and this is fairly early in early August to have that many. So this may be a very active hurricane season, and we encourage people to do everything that's possible. Rainfall and wind is most likely what we expect to be the concerns. We don't anticipate a direct hit, but as we've seen from other other storms, we worry about loss of power. So we've had, starting today, phone calls with Con Edison that serves about 80% of the power to Westchester County, and NYSEG, which serves about 20% in the northern tier of Westchester County. And they each have a number of crews available. Con Edison has indicated that they have 100 line crews that are currently activated. They have 150 additional crews coming on Tuesday morning, and additional crews that will be requested for Tuesday evening. This was a major issue when we had the storm back in 2018, a little over 2.5 years ago, and Con Edison has made preparations to be prepared. NYSEG, the same situation. They have 18 lines currently, crews currently activated on site. They have another 50 line crews that are coming in from other areas within NYSEG, areas further north and west that do not expect to get the brunt of this action. So all of these things are important. As soon as this meeting is over, we'll have a 3:30 call with town supervisors, village mayors, and city mayors to discuss a host of issues, and one of them will be preparation on this so everybody can be as prepared as possible. But the governments have to be prepared, the utilities have to be prepared, and we as individuals have to be prepared as well. We have to do the things that we have necessary to do. As an outgrowth of the COVID impact, we have talked at a couple of settings, and I'll have another press conference a little later in the month dedicated to an update on that, which is where we are as a government fiscally and the impacts of this. We have been hit very dramatically in a loss of revenue, loss of sales tax revenue, loss of hotel tax revenue, and other revenues that have dropped dramatically. In some cases that we have the revenue, but it's below expectations. It's created a fiscal problem for Westchester, and I might add, for most every local government, other county governments, state governments. This is not unique to us. It's not a management set of decisions that have happened. This is the reality of having a pandemic when you shut the society down and you turn off parts of the economic engine. And even when you open it to restart it, it doesn't open fully back to where it was. So we have some financial issues. With that thought in mind, we announced about a month ago that we were going to have a voluntary separation incentive for Westchester County employees. This was nothing I particularly wanted to do. We have, all told, about 5,000 county employees. That includes part-time seasonal employees. It's a little bit closer to 4,500 slots of full-time employees. And we made an option for them to separate, to leave the payroll by the 31st of July, and we made a financial incentive that tied to the years of service for the county. In very general numbers, we've gotten in the vicinity of 220 employees to exercise their options under that program. It is not an early retirement program necessarily, because the county cannot convey retirement benefit. Only the state can do that. The state will have, we understand, no action this year expected for early retirement benefits for government. So we put this into place. It mirrors what was done in the prior administration in 2010 and in 2015. And the reduction in the number of positions now gives us the ability to determine how many of those positions have to be restaffed and how much savings on the personnel side we can gain from that. The hope is that by making this a voluntary program and reducing staff, we can avoid either furloughs, which is a reduction of the amount of time and therefore money that's paid to existing employees, or layoffs in which they lose the job at all. We do this because we think that both furloughs and layoffs hurt the economy. You have people out in the economy with less resources to tap, more people on unemployment. That's a negative as part of the vicious cycle down. So we hope to avoid that, and the steps that we take to try to reduce the gap that we are concerned about, we'll discuss in greater detail, but the voluntary separation incentive was completed. We had a significant number of people that responded. We have communicated with those people that we value what they did here. This is not a goodbye type, get lost type of situation. This is done reluctantly and with great appreciation for their public service, but as a means to reduce the costs of county government so that we can try to balance our budget. At some point in time, we'll need federal assistance, but I use the analogy as it was when I was a young man in my parents' home. I needed a car. I didn't have the money for it. I went to Dad. Dad did not hand me the money for the car. He said, if you earn this much money for the car, then I'll cover the rest of it for you. But you have to figure out how to get this much. And so I went out and did the things that I had to do to earn some money, and then Dad helped me the rest of the way. We're not looking for the federal government, Dad, to just pull us out and we stand there with open arms. How do we have this happen? We intend to do everything that we can as a responsible government to reduce the gap. At some point, that last piece of it will be unreachable for us. And we will need the help of the federal government. We assume that we'll make a strong case, and then at that point in time that the federal government will understand that what you don't want to do is lay off county police. What you don't want to do is lay off correction officers. You don't want to lay off public health nurses. You don't want to lay off the people that are doing the work that provides certain key services. So we'll make that case in due time, but I did want to report that we had some response on that, and we'll get into greater detail at one of the future press conference updates. I want to mention that this week we have the first public forum of our Police Reform and Reimagining Task Force. It will be held this Wednesday, August 5th, from 6 to 8. It will be done in person at 5 different locations: New Rochelle, White Plains, Yonkers, Mount Kisco, and Peekskill, or you can join virtually. And this is kind of an interesting way for us to deal within the parameters of what I've said a second ago about public gatherings. The 5 locations will have room sufficient for up to 50 people to be present, and will speak in person. But then we'll also take testimony from people who will be online through electronic system and be able to have their point of view shared as well. So it's an interesting way to do it, both part in person and part electronically. If you'd like more information, give us a call at 995-2921. 995-2921. You'll get some information. There is an email address that you can use to send written comments or testimony. This is our response to the issues that came in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and that we wanted to have, and that's over 2 months ago, we wanted to have, as we do with everything, an intelligent, responsible response to this. We're looking to look at our systems, our transparency, our accountability, our recruitment, our policies, and determine what can we do better. What can we do here in Westchester County that governs the county police and the training of all of our police, which is what is within our authority. We do not control the local police departments in Yonkers or New Rochelle or any of the towns and villages, but we want to do something that's positive. And similarly to the way we've handled the COVID crisis, similarly to the way we're talking about the issues of our own fiscal concerns, similar to the way we get ready for hurricane events. No fanfare, not a lot of rhetoric, not about politics, about what do we do to help solve a problem. And so this task force public hearing coming up Wednesday night, August 5th, invites your participation. The task force has been impaneled. They've been working now for the last month or so. They're scheduled to issue a report at the end of the year, which will go to the Westchester County Board of Legislators for their review. And they will have in it, I assume, proposals for legislation, proposals for executive orders, proposals for policy changes, all of which we will then discuss and debate. This is not a forum to go off the deep end, as some people have assumed. And of course, politics, it's impossible to get politics out of politics, but some of the things that I've seen get immediately to the political differences in the society. We're here to try to at least have a public debate that includes all voices on this particularly very important and large issue. So with all of those things at hand, I'm going to stop the general commentary. We are looking at continuing these updates once a week. However, depending on what happens with the school situation, we may add additional reporting. We might go to twice a week. We don't know. We don't want to have the showtime every day just for the sake of having showtime. We want it to be something where if we have substantive information to share, we will do that. But at the same time, we know that with the opening of schools, questions are going to rise. And the county government may not be the parent government to the municipal governments. We're a sibling government. And with schools, there's a dotted line between the education function here and general government here. But Westchester, as a regional conduit for things, becomes a very logical place to go. So we will try to summarize policies and ideas, pull them together, and present them in as positive a way as we can. With that, I'm going to stop talking. We're going to give preferential treatment to the members of the press that came out today, put their lives in jeopardy to be here. So Samantha, Grace, you'll get the first shot. We'll do follow-up, and then we'll go to whoever has called in. Samantha?
Yeah, sure. So I want to go back to the parties that you and Ms. Amler were talking about, where people were asking guests to have these negative tests. how many parties are we talking? Are these a select few cases that you just want to get the word out about? Is this something that people should be worried about?
Well, we don't, we don't have a hard number of these things that are happening, but we understand, and generally by, just the normal review of what's happening on social media, we see a greater number of these. So I would say we've probably seen somewhere south of a dozen of such things like this, and spread out in different parts of the county, not all concentrated in one part of the county. So we asked Dr. Amler to address the issue straightforwardly, with the key element of her presentation being that a negative test does not mean you are now protected. You have a cone of invincibility around you because you have a negative test. A negative test is like a picture. And the best example I can give you, I struggle with my weight all the time. I tend toward bad eating habits. So if I took a picture of myself after 3 weeks of being diligent, exercising and dieting, I'd look pretty good. And then in the next week, if I went back to the same bad ways, by the following Friday, I wouldn't look as good as I did in the picture. The picture does not convey a permanent situation. It conveys a point in time. And so that, I think, is as brought as close to home example as I can think of what Dr. Latimer is saying. And so when we want to discourage this, and we know, Samantha, what we have going on out there, and I constantly have said I can relate to it. It's a long time ago, but I remember very well what it was like. The year that I graduated high school in the summer before I started college. It is a great social time. Young people want to be together. They're at a point in their life where that social connection means a lot to them. And there's people you're not going to see for the rest of your life after the summer is over, and you're ready to go away to college. I went locally, but for those who go away to college, it's a whole different world. And they want that connection. I understand that. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. So coming up with ways to get around what is still practical doesn't work. The fact that you need to wear a mask no matter what. And I understand people don't like it, and I understand that people want to get together. We have in this line of work that I'm in a constant desire to be in meetings and converse, whether it's governmental, whether it's political or social, but we know we can't do that. So in this particular case, because there is a pressure now, can we get around these rules? Can we have a party and get around these rules? The answer is no. You can't. Not because we, the government, tell you so. Common sense tells you this. And it may be that young people don't see themselves as vulnerable to the disease, and maybe they're much less vulnerable to the disease, although there have been a number of cases of younger people in their 20s now that have gone in, and some fatalities from it. But if you're communicable, then you can communicate. Then you can give it to. You can communicate it to other people in your life, your parents, grandparents, relatives, people that you see casually. So we have to try to encourage it. So we don't have a hard number as to there's exactly 23 of these situations, but we've seen enough examples of them to know that we want to try to get the message out. Don't do this. Don't do this. You want to have a gathering, socially distance, wear masks. You can still cluster up to a certain amount of people and use common sense.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Grace, any questions?
Sure. As we move towards schools opening, and maybe you don't have enough information to share yet on that, but I'm wondering if you've thought through or have begun to thought through what if there would be a incident of a COVID positive case after the doors opening. Are those things that are being looked at? Because the discussion out there is, well, what's going to happen if somebody gets sick? Is the
Right.
school open or close? Or are those things being looked at?
Well, each school district submitted a plan to the state. They did not submit it publicly yet. The state has those plans in, and they're now making the decision. And as the governor has done in the past, when he comes out with an executive order, in this case, if he chooses to make the executive order to open the schools, he will most likely come with it certain guidelines. And those guidelines will probably be what you're looking for to see what if this and what if that. Oftentimes, the state has tasked the local county health department to administer whatever decisions the state makes in terms of public health. So we'll fall to Dr. Amler and her team, which is a very professional team, and it's not a small group of people, but it's not unlimited either. And so depending on how they structure the follow-up, it would be the county health department that would interact with the school district if a teacher comes down with COVID, a student comes down with COVID. In what setting? Are they, did they come down with it, and then we do contact tracing and we find out that there's 7 to 10 other people that have it? And is it all teachers? Is it all kids? There's a host of different ways this thing could play out. What do you do if it's in one building of a school district? This is what the plan addresses. Do you close one elementary school, and how fast do you get it back up? And what happens to the other elementary schools in town as they pursue a certain curriculum if there's, in-home testing, in-home remote learning, which is probably what happens in situations like this, as young people would be isolated if they've tested positive. And the ability to target enough testing to test a cohort of people, which is generally what's happened. When we had the original outbreak 5 months ago, and the index patient came up positive, there was an ability to do some targeted testing of a large group of people within one particular hotspot. What happens now if there's 10 hotspots or 20 hotspots? How do we have access to the testing and do it? All of that is part of what it was identified in these plans, and then we'll wait to see what the governor does on Friday and what kind of detailed backup he gives to that. And then perhaps next week when we do this again, if I can, I might ask Dr. Amler to join us again next week, and then we'll see what it is we think we have. But it's going to be case by case, Grace. And it's going to be where did it happen, how many people were involved, how much testing, and that'll make the determination of what gets closed, what will have to happen before it can open again. So we're close to those answers, but we're not quite there yet.
There's also a good number of parents who are talking about homeschooling. I'm just wondering, do you think that's a positive alternative? Are you going to encourage that line of thinking?
Well, we're not going to encourage, anything. I think, parents have the option to homeschool. The question is, and each parent has to determine this, do they have the capacity to homeschool and provide the right kind of educational backdrop for their children? Most people who homeschool before the pandemic came are people who philosophically believe in that. They have their reasons not to want their children to go to public schools, and because of that, they then have to go through a certain preparation to provide homeschooling. It's a different situation if people are saying, I'm afraid to send my child to school, and what are my alternatives? And is my alternative that I have to homeschool? And that'll depend, again, on the individual family unit. Is one of the parents available to stay home to actually do the work? Because, as we all know, education is a 5-day-a-week setting, and then separate from that is homework that goes on in theory over the weekend as well as during the weeknights. And that's not a simple thing to do if we're going to do it properly. And if a large group of people in a particular community decide they want to do that, then there's going to have to be some sort of a very clear understanding of the protocols. We run the risk of having a generation of students fall behind in their education process. And, having gone through it all myself and watching my daughter go through it, you don't think about it when you're in 4th grade, how the principles of what you learn in math in 4th grade pivot what you do in 5th grade of math. But clearly, you can't get to high school and grasp algebra and geometry if you haven't mastered multiplication and division in the younger grades. And if you take a year out or poorly train those children at a certain point in time on multiplication and division, you're setting them behind on the path up ahead. So what I would hope would happen is that school districts would look at a more robust remote learning program with professionals rather than immediately move to a homeschooling situation where the curriculum and the coursework is done totally by the parents rather than with the connection. Some students won't do well in a remote learning scenario. I mean, some have to be physically in the classroom in order to achieve the best. All of that is outside of our scope as a county government, but I did serve in the state legislature previously. I had the portfolio for K-12 education and when I was in the state senate, and we thought about these issues, fairly thoroughly without the pandemic, and the pandemic just jumps everything up another, 10 notches above us. Again, we have to see what happens when with the governor's announcement, and then how that's going to be implemented, and that again will tell us more of the details that you're looking for. So, if there are no follow-up questions in the room, we have no remote follow-up questions, but we'll invite any of the press that's covering us to reach out to Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Communications, 995-2932. I assume you have the number on speed dial already. And she'll be happy to ferret any questions, not only to myself, but also to Dr. Amler and any members of our team on any of the elements of all of these things. We will be back before you in a couple of days to groundbreak at Memorial Field, a long-awaited project, one of the many long-awaited projects that we've been fortunate to make progress on, and we'll have some news on that. And when we meet again, we'll not only give you an update on COVID, but on some of these other related issues. There are so many of them out there right now. You'd imagine this is some time for vacation, but Rust never sleeps, and neither does government. So I thank you very much for your time and your attention. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Have a good day. Stay safe.